Hello, everyone, and thanks very much for coming along to this English Australia webinar. This February, we have 2 webinars scheduled about hybrid ELICOS delivery in recognition of the fact that many ELICOS colleges are operating in hybrid mode at the moment in order to cater for both onshore and offshore students. In today's webinar, we have 3 panellists who are all teachers with experience in hybrid delivery. And the aim of this session is really just to have an informal conversation with these panellists, addressing the questions on hybrid delivery, which were submitted in advance by audience members. And thank you to everybody who submitted questions beforehand. We've collated the questions and we'll talk around the main themes from those questions today. I'll also leave time at the end of the webinar for live questions. So please type any questions that you have during the webinar into the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to feed them through to the panellists at the end of the session. The second hybrid webinar that English Australia is running this month is on the burning issue of improving student interaction in hybrid lessons. And that one will be presented by Robert Martinez of the Consultants E at 4:30 p.m. Sydney time on the 23rd of Feb. And you can still register for that session on the English Australia website. So before I introduce today's panellists, I'd like to define what we mean by hybrid delivery in the context of this webinar. So we realise that the word hybrid has different meanings in different contexts. But for this session, when we talk about hybrid delivery, we're referring to classes which are delivered simultaneously to face-to-face students in a classroom and to students who are participating online. Okay, so now I'll introduce today's panellists. Thank you to Thalia Koster, Geraint and Rowena Gill for joining us today to talk about your experiences teaching hybrid ELICOS. Could each of you please briefly introduce yourselves to the audience?
All right, I'll go first. Hello, everyone. My name is Thalia Koster. I am an ESL instructor with ILSC in Brisbane, and I've taught a variety of courses through hybrid, all the way from test and tertiary prep to general English and then skills electives. So I've done the works on it. And our students are generally adult learners, and they are looking to improve their English for their careers back in their home country or to complete tertiary studies in Australia. And before COVID, my hybrid experience would have been from a student's perspective. That would have been at a couple of university classes that I would have done with teachers experimenting it and implementing it in a couple of courses. And I've done a bit of online teaching before that, even back on good old Skype. And that's what I would have done there. Okay, nice to meet everyone.
All right, I'll jump off the back of that. I'm also from ILSC. My name is Geraint, and similar to Thalia, I've been teaching hybrid classes now for about 6 to 8 months. My focus has predominantly been IELTS preparation classes. That's what I've been mainly focused on. Students, like Thalia said, they're adult learners from South America and different parts of Asia, but all the students we've been teaching hybrid have been in my case. And the locations in Australia, maybe in Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, or even Melbourne itself, or even Brisbane itself. And prior to COVID, I had 0 experience of hybrid. This was all new to me, thrown in at the deep end, which was a lot of fun.
Okay, and I'll just jump in now. My name's Rowena Gill, and I work at Griffith English Language Institute, or GELI, in Brisbane. And I predominantly teach academic English and direct entry program on direct entry programs. My students are from all over the world, and we have some onshore and some offshore. And my experience was less than zero before COVID, apart from a few interactive games on Kahoot or Quizlet. That was my only online experience.
Okay, thanks so much for those introductions, and thank you for joining us today, panellists. So before we launch into the questions, we'd like to hear from our audience. So it's always interesting to know who we have in the audience. So please, if you could type your answer to this question into the chat now, we'd appreciate it. The question is, how much experience, if any, have you had teaching hybrid ELICOS or any other type of hybrid class? I'll give you a minute to type your answer into the chat. Okay, so the answers are quite varied. Predominantly, I'm seeing none or very little experience, but some people here have, you know, less than a year experience or 6 months. One person said 18 months. Okay, great. So it's a real mix of people who have no experience and people who have between 6 months and 18 months experience teaching hybrid, which makes a lot of sense that it's not any more than 18 months really in our context. Okay, great. Well, we're going to get started with the questions now that I'm going to ask the panelists. As we're going, let's keep this session really interactive. So audience members, please feel free to type your comments or your extra suggestions or tips into the chat. If you have any questions which you'd like us to ask the panelists, could you please put them into the Q&A box? Just makes it easier for us to find them. Okay, so first question for you, Geraint. What is your hybrid setup in your classroom in terms of technology? And what have been some of the issues or complaints from teachers and or students, and how have you addressed these?
Cool, thank you, Sophie. So prior to COVID, we got a computer and also a large television screen, which would display everything we were looking at on the computer. And that would be at the front of the classroom next to the whiteboard for everybody to see. And hybrid is now introduced a camera and there's a few major additions. So the camera will be sort of either mounted on the wall or a freestanding camera, which you can put anywhere you want in the classroom. And then the microphones are attached to a wire into the computer. And you can hook up the audio so it's coming out through the speakers that are in the television. So everyone talking online can be heard by everyone in the classroom. And hoping that everyone in the classroom can be heard by people online because it's picked up by microphone. So in a nutshell, that's the setup we have. The camera is remote controlled. So as you're moving about the classroom, you can point it at whatever you want to. In terms of some of the complaints, I think listening exercises for me personally have maybe been where most complaints have come from. So some of the classes are quite large, and given the fact that student numbers have been low, I mean, I'm not sure the physics behind this, but it's caused a bit of an echo. And so sometimes when you're playing audio or when someone is speaking in the classroom, it can be hard for the students online to hear that because they complain of getting an echoey sound. I think when it comes to listening tasks, there are certain things that you can do in terms of making sure that you mute the microphone in the classroom when you're sharing computer sound, so the students online aren't getting it twice. They're not getting it through the shared computer audio and also through the microphones. And on the subject of microphones, I think that may have been an area that I heard some teachers make complaints because it is attached to a wire. It kind of limits where you can put it. Now, I mean, they are designed to pick everything up. And I think on the whole, they are pretty good, but there are some instances where you would like to have it closer to you, particularly when you're walking around in the classroom. I guess that's an issue that we've perhaps yet to come up with a solution for, but certainly I don't think it's a major.
Great. And so you're not wearing a lapel mic, you're just relying on the mic for the general classroom.
Yeah, that's right. And as I say, it does a really good job on the whole. I think lapel mics in an ideal world would be perfect, but these mics, they do a pretty good job.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I know I've been to hybrid meetings at ILSC, and you know, the setup and the sounds always worked really well.
Yeah, wonderful to hear. So.
Rowena, how about at your college?
So at Gill, our setup isn't quite the same as Geraint said. Ours is, we have a number of platforms, so it's almost like an online class, and we use Collaborate Ultra through Blackboard. We use Microsoft Teams, and we use Microsoft OneNote. We use OneNote as well. So all the students have to have a device, and when we're in the classroom, the students who are in the classroom work through the screen as well, predominantly. There are a few challenges, and that is that, similar to Geraint said, we can't have mics on. If I'm speaking, then students have to have their mics off in the classroom. Otherwise, we get all that feedback and it's really painful. What can I say in terms of other challenges? I think there are a lot of platforms to navigate, and so it takes a little bit of training. But after when we had the emergency training on the outset, it was very, very challenging. But now the students, before they come into class, they have little workshops, and and we're very, very lucky. We are supported by a team who can almost sort out anything apart from power cuts or internet not working. So any other things? No, I think that's it really. All right, thank you.
Okay, great. And Rowena, when you say that in-person students are working through their screens, are they mostly laptops you're using?
Yes, some students might have a laptop, and then they might also have a an iPad, and sometimes they have to work through their phones. It depends. Technology doesn't always work, and so they have lots of contingencies.
And is it something that you tell students when they enroll that they need to bring a laptop to class with them? Is that?
Yes, in fact, I know that we are considering that hopefully when students all come back on shore, we probably won't ever go back to paper, ever, which has been a good thing. Yes, it's an expectation. So obviously at the beginning of COVID, we couldn't expect that from anybody. And we also we're very lucky, there are lots of computers that could be loaned to students when they need to. If they're on campus, we've got laboratories where they can go and use a uni computer. So I know I'm in a very fortunate position in terms of the way we have hybrid in our institution.
Yeah, great. All right, so we can move on to the next question now. I guess one of the considerations with hybrid teaching is making sure that the online cohort and the face-to-face cohort have opportunities to interact with each other. And I know in the beginning, teachers found that one of the most challenging things to make it feel like a seamless classroom that was homogenous. So Thalia, I'll address this next question to you first. What are some considerations for integrating online and face-to-face students in discussion and interactive activities?
Luckily, there's a lot of opportunity to bring both of those different types of students together. I've found like the best way, of course, is good planning when it comes to your lessons. I let students know, probably the day before, I need you guys to make sure you're bringing earphones in. And this is, so if they are going to be working on their mobile phones or their laptops and they want to be in discussion groups with the online students, they'll be able to do that using their earphones. And it solves a million things. Obviously, that you won't get, you'll be able to hear the students and you don't get too much feedback with a mobile phone earphone. So it's really great that way for students to interact and join discussion rooms with students online. I always encourage them, of course, to have their webcam on so they can see, so it becomes like a face-to-face discussion, if that makes sense. Other interactive activities like comes down to even writing. I get my students to email each other, especially if you're teaching IELTS, if you're teaching any Cambridge courses or preparing them or doing like a little bit of, email practice. It's a really great way to get the students to practice like a proper email conversation or create that email thread. And I CC myself in and students know I'm CC'd in, and it's a great way to set tasks and have them communicate with each other, whether it's formal or informal writing. So there's a lot of fun activities you can do just to keep the classes together, and they get to know each other quite well. And it's always nice to hear them, like some of them are in Melbourne or Sydney or Adelaide, and talk about the different, just the different states that they're in, the different cities they're in, and they really enjoy doing those kind of activities together. But yeah, just considering the materials you have, tell them to bring in their earphones, tell them to, be on the webcam to participate, all those sort of things. Helps it become that homogenous kind of classroom feel. So yeah, just taking into consideration all those sort of things. Yeah.
And how would you pair an in-person student with an online student in a breakout room, for example?
Oh, I do it randomly. If there's particular students that I would like to be together, or they've, if they're doing a presentation together, for example, and they've chosen each other as their partners, then obviously you can do that all in Microsoft Teams. Other than that, it's random, and I try to make sure I pair students from different countries with each other. So there's, just making sure there's nothing but English practice going on and those sort of things. Yeah, just monitoring that sort of thing.
Okay, great. Rowena, how about for you in your classes? Because I know you teach mainly academic English classes. So how have you managed to integrate online and face-to-face students in your classroom?
As I said, I'm very fortunate, and we use Collaborate Ultra, so we have the opportunity to use breakout rooms, and I tend to do a combination of things. I can either, and I tend to put people in groups of 3 because sometimes there are issues with, connections, etc. So that means if people drop out, there's always somebody in the room. I try and mix people up onshore, offshore. Sometimes I might, and I think sometimes onshore students like to speak face to face. So it's sometimes I'll sort it so that they can actually be in the classroom working in a group. I won't draw everyone's attention to it, and I don't do it very often, but it's just so that they feel that there's that value of being in the room, because otherwise they could be offshore and it wouldn't really matter. What else do we have to do? Couple of other things. You did ask about feedback, and I thought often in those breakout rooms I might get them to, I would say to them that, you're going to practice whatever we're doing, and then we're discussion that we might be having, and then you might feedback your own or other people's opinions. We might report back to them, to the main room. If they've got a group of discussion questions, I might just pick out 1 or 2 that I think are the critical ones that we all need to share in the main room when we get back. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, one more thing that I found really useful, and that was that, I don't know, sometimes onshore students might understand what is expected of them. I don't know, because they get all those kind of cues from that face-to-face interaction. And so often it's quite good to pair them with someone offshore so that those people offshore get a better understanding of what's going on. Yeah, because you can, if you, like, I try and write it in the chat, I try and make sure I've got a slide with it, with the instructions on, but you don't have all of that. So sometimes it's good to pair onshore, offshore, just so that they, and then if they've got questions, of course, I encourage them to ask me, but if sometimes they want it to come through their pair, and so I think that's also a good tip.
Yeah, no, it's a really nice tip, that buddy peer system, just to clarify any questions that people offshore might have. that the students in the classroom probably have easier access to you to ask, you know, 1,000,001 questions and get that notification. Yeah, okay, great. Thalia, I know you play around a lot with the technology in your classroom. Somebody submitted a question asking that if there is no class-wide 180-degree camera in the room, what's the best way to enable online students to see in-class students?
Yeah, so this might come down to like the technology you have available in your classroom. So there is no 180-degree camera or something that shows the students working. It might come back down to those sort of discussion groups or where students are also on their own devices within the classroom and they're also using their own webcam. I've known people to also like use their own mobile phone device as a camera or turn around their screen camera that might be attached as well. But I do recommend having a classroom camera. It's not the be all and end all. So if you don't have that set up, that's okay. I do encourage like, you know, trying out students using their own devices so that they can interact with each other that way. Yeah, especially if you don't have a class-wide camera.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a process of trial and error if you don't have that class-wide camera, I know. And I remember seeing Mark Rooney from Monash College talking last year, and he was saying he actually had 3 different webcams set up around the room, just a Logitech webcam. And he was pressing Control-N, which changed the camera view, so he could switch the cameras throughout the class, and he was making it work that way. He also had different zones in his classroom. So he had his presentation zone or his lecture zone as a teacher, but he had a discussion zone. So whenever there was a class discussion happening, he would get the in-class students to go to the discussion zone. And that was where the camera was to make it easier for the online students to see that discussion happening.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's an amazing idea. People can be quite creative with those.
Yeah, his fourth zone was actually outside. So he'd get the in-person students to go outside around Melbourne with the camera and, you know, show the online students the city and different, you know, if they were studying engineering or architecture, different, you know, aspects that related to the topic.
It's lovely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that, Thalia. And I guess this question relates to the camera as well. One of the attendees asked about the teacher and the camera, and they've said in their experience of hybrid, the teacher is standing in front of the camera in the classroom and they can't move around because then they won't be seen. How can the teacher change this so that they can move around the classroom?
Again, it comes down to the technology. Luckily, we've got cameras that have more than one, like it turns around. So I've got settings on my camera where I can program it to 1, 2, and 3, and it can show the entire classroom. It can show me and my whiteboard, which I very much love. And of course, it can also show like an overall view of the whiteboard and the students. So it comes down to what you have with technology. And again, the microphone, I bring in this headset, I take this in with me to work and I can run around and move around. It doesn't matter where I am in the classroom. So having access to technology is something that a lot of schools and colleges really need to like consider as to teach successful hybrid classes. It's definitely possible without, but it's very, you can be a lot more comfortable and it can feel like a normal class with these kind of things in play. So it's definitely something to consider. If you do find that you only have a camera and it's just focusing on that one view, maybe perhaps I think a lot of computers have like a webcam, maybe switching it from that one classroom standing up presenting to sitting down and pretending it like an online class just for a little bit to have more of an interaction with the students online could be just a way to move around a little bit more. But yeah, there's quite a few different things you can do, but it does come down to the technology.
Okay, let's move on to the next question now. which is about conducting speaking exams with hybrid classes. So somebody has asked if, in your experience, it's best practice to assess offshore students and face-to-face onshore students all online via breakout rooms, or has there been resistance from onshore students and teachers to do that? So Geraint, I might address this one to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So teaching IELTS, I guess speaking is one of the core components of that. And speaking tests is something that we do sort of sporadically throughout each session to try and prepare the students. And I think mock speaking tests can often present their own challenges outside of hybrid, because there's a period of time when you have to kind of divert your attention away from the classroom and focus on one individual student for 12 to 15 minutes. And I think those challenges are still there with hybrid. To try and get to the heart of the question now, I think for me, and having spoken to other IELTS teachers at ILSC who have also been teaching hybrid, I think it's a good idea to stick with doing face-to-face mock tests with the onshore students in the classroom. And then use separate breakout rooms to conduct individual speaking tests with the students who are online. And whilst that's going on, I guess we've all had experience with this, making sure you have a suitable activity that students who aren't in the speaking test with you can be getting on with, so that you can then come back together as a class and go through that. In terms of any sort of kickback or resistance, thankfully, I can't say I've experienced that. I guess something that might happen is if a student finishes the activity sooner, they might feel slightly disengaged. And I think that's something to be wary of, is to make sure that you plan activities accordingly to the level you're teaching and whatnot, so that the students who aren't in your speaking test don't have that temptation, particularly if they're online, to switch off and maybe go and make a cup of tea or do whatever they might do when they're sitting at home. So I think that is probably the bigger challenge. I'd say conducting the tests face-to-face for onshore students is how I would go about it, and then doing them in separate private breakout rooms for the online students. But as I say, I think the main thing is making sure you have suitable material to keep the other students engaged when you're not actually teaching.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Rowena, how about at Gill? Do you conduct all of your speaking assessments online, even for the face-to-face students? I think you're on mute, Rowena.
Yes, I am like a student, keep forgetting to switch that microphone back on. We tend to do all our tests online in breakout rooms, or there are certain assessments that might be taking part in a debate or presenting again online, so that everybody has the same, I had the phrase in my head before, but that has the same experience, and that it's much harder to present online than it is face, or it can be perceived to be. So just like everything to be standard, so the tests are the same.
Absolutely, yeah, I think there's a real mix of what colleges are doing for the speaking assessments. All right, so before I start asking some of the questions that have come through in the Q&A, I might just ask all of our panellists what your biggest challenge has been in teaching hybrid and how you've addressed this. But before I throw it out to the panel, I might throw it to the audience first. So for those of you who have taught hybrid before, what have you found challenging and how have you addressed it? And for those of you who haven't taught hybrid but are potentially going to be teaching hybrid, what do you imagine will be challenging about teaching hybrid? So I'll just give the audience a minute to think about their answers and type them into the chat now. Okay, thank you to our audience. Yeah, a lot of people have talked about working the technology, assessments has been challenging, the webcam, where to put it, how we can make the teacher and students in the classroom visible to all. Somebody's mentioned seeing facial expressions. Yeah, I mean, that must be really hard to read people's facial expressions when there's so much going on and when some are online and some are in person. Someone else has mentioned facilitating collaboration between the two different cohorts of students. Oh, well, thank you to our audience for those comments. And just very quickly to our panelists, what was your biggest challenge and how did you overcome it? So let's go with you first, Geraint.
Hey, thanks. So first of all, a lot of relatable things I'm seeing in the chat there. I think I could probably stick my name to most of those and say they were what I was afraid of. One of the biggest challenges, though, I think I saw this in the comments, was making sure that I divided my attention between online students and physical students in the classroom equally to ensure that they both thought that they were getting, you know, a proper lesson and enough of my attention. I wasn't ignoring one over the other. And I think when you're standing there with a camera in front of you, because we have the cameras either, like I say, mounted or placed so that they're monitoring, that can be a bit weird. And suddenly you find yourself looking at the camera and you've been looking at the camera for 5 minutes and you're like, oh, hang on, there's people in front of me. And so you suddenly look at them and then the same thing happens. You've been looking at them and you're like, oh, hang on, there's people online. And it's a difficult thing. I think in reality, you just have to get your students involved, be honest about it. This is going to be a new experience for your students as well as you. And I think for the most part, students are pretty forgiving and understanding. And then, as much as it pains me to say this, it is something that comes with time. You'll slowly find yourself becoming okay with the camera there staring at you, and you'll just learn to look at it like you're looking at another person. So I think if you're trying to figure out, you know, how do you look at the camera and feel comfortable, just pretend the camera's another student. You know, don't tell yourself it's linked up to 15 students who are watching you. And that way, as you make eye contact naturally with people around the classroom, you make eye contact with the camera who is a student, and then you kind of fall into that role of not even noticing that the camera's there.
Thank you. Thalia.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of relatable things are being said. I think for me, the biggest challenge was probably the initial limit that we had when it came to the technology. So, you know, we didn't have all the fancy gear at that point in time. It's more or less an investment. So if it's a college that's looking to get into hybrid teaching, really consider the correct technology to use when it comes to doing a hybrid class. And it's not just for the benefit, you know, to benefit the students, it's also to help the teacher. Having that technology there and making sure that it works really helps like teachers feel more confident in their classroom and makes them feel more at ease if the technology is functioning and working. Also making sure that, you know, we're all new at this event. Initially, we were all new at this, so including all our supervisors and directors of studies, they had no idea about this. But eventually, it's being able to ensure that there's going to be some sort of training and support for the teachers as you go on. Yeah, definitely. I think the most challenging part is that.
Absolutely. And Rowena, your biggest challenge?
Oh, it was fear, absolute terror at the thought of working with all this different technology. And as was mentioned before, in that emergency period, no one knew what they were doing. And so when technology failed, there was a huge panic. But now I think the longer you do it, the more you just breathe your way through any kind of technology fail, and there's always a way of contacting someone to say I'm locked out of the room. It's just like in the real world. people online, you get better at problem solving, and that you just need to be open to, or be flexible and be open to anything that happens in the classroom in the real world can happen online as well. So that was my biggest challenge, actually. I think I'm amazed myself actually how much I could learn in such a short time.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anyone can learn. If I can learn it, anybody could do it. Could try.
Nice, thank you. And thanks to everyone for sharing your other challenges in the chat with us. We do have some questions that have come through from the audience. So one person has asked what the ratio of class-based to online students is in your classes.
I think for me at the beginning it was fairly 50-50. I'd say there was a fairly even balance. I think now that has changed. I think in light of this Omicron wave, I found that more students who are actually in Brisbane City have decided to stay online because of either they're isolating, they may have tested positive, or they're just being cautious. And so I think in this month of January particularly, it's tipped in favour of having more online students than classroom ones. But I think, hey, who knows what's going to happen with different variants and whatnot, but I'd say looking at somewhere around 50-50 prior to these recent Omicron outbreaks.
And Rowena, what about for your classes? What's the ratio?
Well, things are very similar as Geraint said, which was that we started with about 50-50. Those students who were still here, those students who didn't go home or didn't have the opportunity to go home. And now we really have a very small cohort. I'd say a third of the class might be onshore, sometimes slightly less. That's the kind of balance that we have at the moment.
Thalia, did you want to add anything there?
I was going to say, I think it was last year in December, I had a turnout probably quite like every week of at least one student physically, and the rest were online. And so we like co-taught the class, him and I. I think it's quite flexible hybrid with no matter how many students you have present in the class or online, you generally can do everything that you would normally do. It doesn't really matter the ratio of students in the class or online.
What a great experience for that student.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Just related to this, someone has asked if students have the choice if they're onshore to attend in person or online. Could you answer that, please?
Yeah, they do have a choice. So if they'd like to stay home, even though they're in Brisbane, or they're a bit worried or concerned about contracting, like for example, Omicron, they are welcome to participate online and rather than come into class. And if they feel good enough that they would like to come in and participate in the classroom, then they're welcome to come back on in.
So is it the case that you're never sure how many students you'll have physically in your classroom when you're preparing your lessons?
Well, basically it's like that, yeah. So you just learn to adapt to it. Like I said, it's possible with one student, it's possible with 10 in the class. Like it doesn't really matter too much with it. They're quite flexible and students understand. And I don't foresee that to be, hopefully not the norm where you only have one student in the class. You know how many students are possible to come to your class. And usually I just prepare that amount of material. Or if I know that, for example, like last month, not many students were going to be turning up, I would probably just leave out paper in general and I would plan something else. Yeah.
And Rowena, at Gill, can onshore students choose if they're going to participate online or in person?
Well, prior to Omicron, we kind of, if students were onshore, they were encouraged to come to class.
Yes.
We've all been encouraged to stay home and we're going back on campus, and I'm not sure what the ruling will be. So, some students, I think we need to be flexible. Students we have adult learners, and they might want to make their own decisions about their health. So some of them may decide they'd like to stay home a little bit longer. I mean, because we can work online and all the writing, everything's online now. I think it's a possibility. Of course, they miss out on so much if they don't come on campus, but that's a decision that some of them might make themselves, I think.
Yeah. And of course, that's the beauty of hybrid, is the flexibility it offers the students.
Yeah, of course, you know, those of them that are vulnerable or shielding or actually have COVID, you know, can still be in Colombia and be in my classroom, you know, for 2 weeks, coughing and feeling quite unwell, but very happy to be learning, you know, so that's one of the advantages.
Absolutely. One of our audience members have asked for some useful tips when it comes to effective monitoring between face-to-face and online students.
Thalia, are you trying to talk, or
I was going to say, yeah, sorry. I was going to say, like, in your initial lesson, like the first lesson you do, talk to them about etiquette. A lot of the time I'm not looking at the screen. So if they're raising their hands or pressing an icon, oh, I don't even know how to do this on Zoom. Let's have a look. But if you're putting your hand up like this or raising your hand, I'm not going to see it. I'm engaging with the class, or I'm having discussion, or I'm looking at the camera. So telling them in the first lesson what the etiquette is can really, really help set the tune for your classroom. And this might be, oh, if you have a question, say, oh, excuse me, I have a question. And then I can hear it because the audio is there and I can look towards the TV. Those sort of like just cues help you like direct your classroom a little bit more and manage them both happening simultaneously. It also teaches, I really notice a lot of students are excellent now at interrupting and being interrupted. So they use their language skills really well. They're like, oh, no, excuse me, I don't agree with that. And then it creates a really good conversation pattern, really. They've picked up some really interesting things thanks to hybrid, which has been really interesting for me to note. But basically just showing them in the first couple of lessons how that etiquette works and how to get the attention, or how to have a conversation, or how to have yourself heard is a really good way just to set yourself up for a successful hybrid class for that course. Yeah, I might have gone off the topic.
No, thank you. That definitely answered the question. Another person has asked for students who are coming into class in person, if you communicate the expectations regarding what they need to bring with them to class in terms of devices and headsets, etc. So is that made very clear to the students? Rowena, we'll start with you.
Yes, it's made very clear to them what they'll need before they come onshore or before they start the class. And they, as I think I mentioned before, they're also shown how to use the different platforms so that they should, it depends on their language level, but you know, they should become quite proficient using all of those in order to be able to write collaboratively in OneNote or upload here, download there, etc. So yeah, it's made very clear.
Yeah, I've heard of quite a few colleges with high stakes programs. I've heard of just in the enrolment forms stipulating what students need to have with them to be able to participate in class in terms of devices. At ILSC, do you make that very clear to students?
Not something I'm overly familiar with, maybe slightly above my pay grade, but I think, yes, if you're enrolling as an online student, it will be made clear, you know, the materials and the electronic devices you will need in order to participate. As for physical students coming in, I think the idea is they are still expecting to get a lesson that they would have if hybrid didn't exist. And so there's no prerequisites in terms of electronic devices. It's just the standard pen and paper, which none of them have anyway, right? So, but yeah, I think for physical students coming into the classroom, there's no expectations for them to have a particular device.
That's an interesting point, actually, because they're actually coming to class, so yeah, the expectations are different. That relates to the next question that's been asked, which is, do you provide incentives for students to come into class face to face? So what we've been hearing from colleges around Australia is that it's been quite difficult to get onshore students to come back to the classroom, that a lot of students are preferring the online experience, probably for convenience reasons. Do any of your colleges offer incentives, or how do you make it attractive for students to come back?
Oh, all I hear is how much they hate online. I get nothing but that complaint. So I think it really depends on the learner, and I don't know if encouraging incentives is a good idea or not, because everyone learns differently. I think it really depends how they are learning online. If they're, for example, sometimes you get students who refuse to talk, don't want to turn on their webcam, etc. Like that's not a student learning online at all. So it's more or less making sure those expectations, if they are going to be learning online, they're fulfilling those expectations so that they actually are learning online. And if not, then like the incentive to come to class really is because they do get the classroom experience that they complain that online is not giving them. So it's kind of interesting. It's been so opposite at the college because they just all hate online. But I would like to think that a lot more students would like to come back and do face-to-face.
Yeah, and I guess, the onshore cohort that we have at the moment is probably quite different to the general onshore cohort, because a lot of them have been here for a long time. So they may not be craving that, in-classroom cultural experience like a student who just arrives would be as well. And someone's just commented in the chat that actually studying online is cheaper because you don't have to pay the public transport costs to get to class as well. So I guess, both sides are quite interesting and compelling when you think about the arguments. Yeah, Rowena.
One of the incentives I think we have is that when they're students that come to class build that class spirit that somebody in the chat mentioned, they get that extra interaction just from being in the classroom early in the morning, and also, either leaving together. And we try and organise, whenever there's some kind of holiday or celebration or something or day, we might have Australia, I don't know, might celebrate Christmas, and we'll have small gifts and some food, etc. Just like you used to do, like we would have had for the Lunar New Year, where we would have had dragon dancing. We didn't do that this year because we weren't on campus. But we're trying to start doing those things again, which mean if you're on campus, you feel like you're getting some of that extra value that encourage you to come in.
That's a really great point, that on-campus spirit that happens, making sure that that's part of the campus now that students are back too.
I have tried to try and create that offshore as well by asking them to set up their own kind of informal team meetings where they can just drop in and have a chat with each other. And it works to some extent, but it's not the same as if you're in class.
Final question for our panelists, and then I'll address the last question that's come up about regulation in the chat as well. But for our panelists, how much extra time, if any, do you spend preparing hybrid classes? And I guess that's going to be compared to face-to-face and to purely online classes.
I think for me, when I started out with hybrids, there's a little bit more preparation in terms of making sure that the materials you want for online students are going to be available in whatever platform you're using for them to access. Now, when you're first trialing this out, it's probably going to take a little longer because you're going to try, I think what I'd advise is getting another teacher to log in as a student would, just to make sure that those files are accessible. So the first week is probably going to be a little bit more work in terms of asking people for help and like making sure that things are accessible to students. And also sort of brain power of thinking, okay, how am I going to make this activity fit the hybrid class as opposed to just physical students. And then as you become familiar with uploading documents, I think preparation time then just gets reduced, and whatever time you would normally spend planning a lesson, I would say it's maybe personally like an extra 20 minutes, maybe uploading all the documents and making sure that you've checked each one so it's downloaded properly and that sort of thing. So in the beginning, it may feel like a lot, particularly when you come into your classroom and you want to make sure that everything's set up okay. But then as you become more familiar with those online platforms and with where you want your camera to be, that prep time will reduce. It will be slightly more, inevitably, than just doing a face-to-face class, but it will become, you know, something that you don't even register, 10, 20 minutes, I'd say maximum over time.
Would you agree with that, Thalia and Rowena?
Not sure. I think the time is certainly reduced now, because some of the things that, when you're an experienced teacher face to face, your preparation time is cut because of your experience, not because you aren't thinking of doing things. It's just that you know, because you've done it many times before, I suppose. And I found with teaching online that, you know, managing breakout rooms and making sure that they're in groups and teams, and that you've got people you can nominate who you want in particular groups. That takes a lot of time at first, but then you get better at it, much smarter. And of course you prepare, and I like to put everything on PowerPoint, which I never really used to do in the classroom in a face-to-face situation. And that of course also reduces on time once you start to get templates for things that you've that you find a popular way or a good way of interacting in the classroom. So,
yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it's like learning anything new for the first time. You're no expert at the beginning. It does take a little more time just to be like, if you prepare a bit more, you actually feel more confident in the class as well. So making sure you put that extra prep maybe in the beginning, but now I don't even think about it anymore. I've done online teaching and I've done face-to-face teaching as well. I've kind of been able just to mash the two together. So luckily I have all the materials already, but it's definitely something where developing, you know, the resources and materials and utilizing what you already have, utilize it, because it's still going to benefit you even in a hybrid classroom. So as long as you're using the same materials you have, it's just being put onto a different platform basically, and eventually you'll see the time that you spend planning and preparing reduce just as you become more confident with it, really. Yeah,
and look, hats off to ELICOS teachers all around Australia for the last 2 years, because everybody has just experienced an incredibly steep learning curve and put in the extra hours, as you say, because when you're learning something new, that's what you do. But it's good to hear that it gets easier. All right, and the final question I'll answer. So Peter has asked if the regulators are likely to permit ongoing online learning for ELICOS, and therefore, what is the likely lifespan of hybrid learning? So yeah, look, I guess at the moment, the regulators are still operating with full flexibility around the ELICOS standards. So as we know, the ELICOS standards do mandate 20 hours of face-to-face teaching per week for ELICOS students, but in the current environment, we're all operating with full flexibility around that to be able to teach online. Interestingly enough, the last time the ELICOS standards were reviewed, English Australia was very much involved in the consultation process. And when we went out to ELICOS colleges, overwhelmingly, colleges told us that they did not want the 20 hours face-to-face legislation to be changed, that they wanted to keep that. But of course, that was back in 2018, and it would be really interesting to hear what people have to say about that now, having experienced this online period. I guess how long is a piece of string? It's impossible to say what is going to happen with online learning and ELICOS at the moment. But English Australia is currently undertaking a Future of ELICOS project. Last year, we surveyed the ELICOS sector, and I think we had around 180 responses to the survey about what ELICOS colleges would like to see happen in the sector going forward. And now we're undertaking a process of consultation with the Department of Education, TEXA, ASQA, and the sector to try and involve everybody in the conversation around what ELICOS will look like in the future. So that's sort of a very roundabout answer to your question, Peter. So we will have to finish there. Thank you to everybody for coming and for all of our audience's participation. That was a really nice interactive session. And thank you very much to our panelists. It was so fantastic just to hear about your personal experiences as teachers in the hybrid environment, and also very, I learned a lot, so very educative for all of us as well. So thank you very much for that.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
And good luck and all the best for everyone who's embarking on their hybrid journey.
Yes,
Yeah.
good luck, good luck. It'll be so much fun.
Thank you. Thank you.